The morning sun cast long shadows across Westfield Elementary's playground when everything changed in 30 seconds. Children's laughter echoed through the crisp spring air as swings creaked rhythmically and teachers chatted by weathered benches, their coffee steaming in the cool breeze. The scent of fresh mulch mixed with the distant aroma of cafeteria pizza, creating that unmistakable school atmosphere that parents remember long after graduation. But then, Noro stopped. The German Shepherd, K9, recently assigned to the school's safety program, froze mid-stride during what should have been a routine recess patrol. His muscular frame went rigid, ears snapping forward like radar dishes, detecting an invisible signal that no human could perceive. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The air seemed to thicken around him as his nostrils flared, processing scents that carried stories from the past. Without warning, the 70-pound canine bolted toward the forgotten corner of the playground where an old maintenance shed sat surrounded by overgrown weeds and cracked asphalt. This was the corner nobody paid attention to, the place where broken equipment went to rust and die, where shadows lingered even in broad daylight. Noro's powerful legs churned across the grass as he launched himself toward that desolate patch of earth. And then he began to dig. His claws scraped frantically at the dry soil, sending dirt flying in desperate arcs, while deep, urgent growls rumbled from his chest like thunder before a storm. The sound cut through the playground like a knife through silk, primal and haunting. In seconds, every swing fell silent. A dropped lunchbox hit the pavement with a metallic clang that seemed to echo forever. Mrs. Peterson's coffee mug shattered on concrete, the brown liquid spreading like spilled secrets. Every eye turned toward the German Shepherd, as if some ancient instinct whispered that something terrible lay beneath that innocent patch of ground. Something that had been waiting 7 long years to be found. Mrs. Carlton, the school counselor, rushed across the playground with her heart hammering against her ribs, her sensible shoes slipping slightly on the dewy grass. "Noro! No!" she called sharply, but her voice carried an undertone of dread that she couldn't quite suppress. The German Shepherd ignored her completely, his powerful paws returning obsessively to the same patch of earth as if guided by an invisible force. Officer Lewis, Noro's handler, sprinted across the field with his radio crackling urgent static, his face pale as he witnessed behavior he'd never seen from his partner. "He's found something," Lewis muttered, his voice barely audible above the dog's increasingly frantic digging. Even when he clipped the leash to Noro's harness, the canine refused to back away, whining with an almost human desperation that sent chills down the spines of everyone watching. That's when the dirt shifted, revealing a glimpse of something that made every adult freeze in horror. Something small, something pink, faded fabric emerging from the earth like a terrible secret finally demanding to be told. At first, they thought it might be a discarded toy, maybe a doll's shoe carelessly buried by some child during recess years ago. But when Officer Lewis knelt and carefully pulled the object from the soil with trembling hands, the playground fell into a silence so complete that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. It was a child's sneaker, not just any sneaker, but a tiny pink left-footed shoe with a worn butterfly sticker on the side, the kind that hadn't been sold in stores for over 5 years. The butterfly's wings were cracked and faded, but still visible like a ghostly reminder of innocence lost. Mrs. Carlton's face drained of all color as recognition dawned, her hand flying to cover her mouth while tears began to well in her eyes. Because there were still a few teachers at Westfield who remembered Aliyah Robinson, the 6-year-old girl who had vanished from these very grounds 7 years ago, leaving behind only questions, fear, and a case that had gone cold as winter stone. And now, thanks to a dog who refused to stay silent, the truth was finally clawing its way back to the surface. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel K9 Loyal Souls, where we uncover true stories of animals' bravery you won't believe until you see it, and tell us in the comments, what city are you watching us from? Welcome to a story that will challenge everything you believe about justice, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between humans and their four-legged guardians. This is not just another tale of police work or missing persons cases that fade into bureaucratic files and forgotten headlines. This is the extraordinary account of how one German Shepherd's unwavering determination exposed a predator who had evaded law enforcement for over a decade, moving like a shadow through school districts across multiple states, leaving broken families and unanswered questions in his wake. In the quiet suburban town of Westfield, where manicured lawns stretch endlessly and children ride bicycles down tree-lined streets without a care in the world, a darkness had been festering beneath the surface for 7 long years. The disappearance of 6-year-old Aaliyah Robinson had torn through the community like a wildfire, consuming the sense of safety that small-town America prides itself on. Search parties had combed every inch of the surrounding area. Volunteers had distributed thousands of flyers with her smiling face, and investigators had followed every lead until they reached dead ends that offered nothing but frustration and heartbreak. The case files gathered dust on metal shelves in the precinct basement. The media attention shifted to newer tragedies, and slowly, painfully, the town learned to live with the haunting reality that some questions might never find answers. Parents began walking their children to school again. Teachers stopped checking the locks on classroom doors twice, and life resumed its comfortable rhythm, though always with that underlying current of unease that settles into a community when evil has touched it and escaped unpunished. But what the human investigators couldn't detect, with all their training and technology, what the most advanced forensic equipment couldn't uncover, what years of methodical detective work had failed to reveal, lay waiting in the soil for someone with senses far superior to our own. Enter Noro, a magnificent German Shepherd canine officer whose training in explosives and narcotics detection had prepared him for many dangerous situations, but not for the moment when his instincts would unlock a mystery that had stumped law enforcement agencies across the country. This powerful canine, with his keen intelligence and unwavering focus, possessed something that no human investigator could match: the ability to sense what others had missed, to hear whispers from the past that called out for justice. This is the story of how a dog's bark became a voice for the voiceless, how loyalty transcended death itself, and how sometimes the most important discoveries come not from sophisticated investigative techniques or cutting-edge technology, but from the unwavering determination of a creature who simply refuses to walk away when something is fundamentally wrong. Prepare yourself for a journey into the darkest corners of human nature and the brightest examples of courage and dedication, where justice wears fur and speaks in barks that echo louder than silence, where the smallest clues can unravel the biggest mysteries, and where sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the most unexpected places to ensure that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always find a way to surface. Tuesday morning arrived at Westfield Elementary like any other, with the familiar symphony of yellow school buses rumbling down suburban streets, their diesel engines creating a comforting backdrop to the start of another ordinary day. The air carried the sweet scent of blooming dogwood trees mixed with the earthy aroma of freshly watered playground mulch, while the morning sun painted golden streaks across the asphalt where chalk hopscotch squares had been drawn by eager hands the day before. Children poured from bus doors with backpacks bouncing against their shoulders, their voices creating a cheerful cacophony of excitement about upcoming spelling tests, soccer practice, and weekend plans that seemed a lifetime away. Teachers stood by their classroom doors with steaming coffee mugs, exchanging knowing glances about the mountain of papers waiting to be graded, and the parent conferences scheduled for later that week. The playground equipment stood ready for another day of childhood adventures, the swings swaying gently in the morning breeze like pendulums, marking time in this safe haven where the biggest Worry was typically a scraped knee or a forgotten lunch money, but beneath this veneer of normalcy, something ancient and terrible was stirring, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself through the keen senses of a creature trained to detect what humans cannot. Noro padded across the school grounds with the confidence of a professional, his black and tan coat gleaming in the sunlight as he performed his routine security sweep alongside Officer Lewis, his trusted handler. The German. Shepard's powerful frame moved with fluid grace, his intelligent brown eyes scanning the environment with the methodical precision of a seasoned law enforcement officer. His nose worked constantly, processing thousands of scent molecules that painted an invisible map of everything that had passed through this space in recent hours. To the children watching from classroom windows, Noro represented safety and excitement, a real-life hero dog whose presence made them feel protected and special. To the teachers, he was a reassuring symbol of the school's commitment to security in an increasingly uncertain world. But to Noro himself, this was serious work that demanded complete focus and unwavering attention to detail. As the morning recess bell rang and children began flooding onto the playground with their boundless energy and infectious laughter, Noro continued his methodical patrol, unaware that he was about to make a discovery that would shatter the peaceful facade of Westfield. Elementary forever, and set in motion a chain of events that would expose secrets buried deeper than anyone could have imagined. The moment arrived, without warning, like lightning splitting a clear sky on a perfect spring morning. Noro's routine patrol came to an abrupt halt near the forgotten corner of the playground, where an old maintenance shed squatted among weeds and broken concrete, its weathered walls bearing the scars of countless seasons and neglect. His muscular body went rigid as steel, every fiber of his being focused on something invisible to human perception, but crystal clear to his extraordinary senses. The German shepherd's nostrils flared wide as he processed scent molecules that told stories from years past, his extensive training in detection work, screaming that something monumentally significant lay beneath this innocent-looking patch of earth that had been walked over by thousands of unsuspecting feet. The air around him seemed to thicken with tension as his ears swiveled forward like satellite dishes, homing in on a distant signal, his intelligent brown eyes fixed on the ground with laser-like intensity that spoke of a discovery beyond ordinary comprehension. Without hesitation or regard for protocol, he bolted toward the spot with explosive energy that startled nearby sparrows into frantic flight, his powerful legs churning across the grass, while deep, urgent growls rumbled from his chest like distant thunder rolling across a darkening horizon. The primal sound cut through the playground's cheerful noise like a blade through silk, causing heads to turn sharply and conversations to stop mid-sentence, as an ancient instinct whispered to every human present that something was terribly wrong. Children paused in their games of tag and hopscotch, their young faces reflecting confusion and growing unease as they instinctively sensed the urgency radiating from the normally calm K-9 officer, while teachers began moving closer with growing concern, etched deeply across their faces and coffee mugs forgotten in their hands. Officer Lewis sprinted after his partner with his radio crackling urgent static, calling for immediate backup, as his years of experience working with detection dogs told him that Noro had never, in all their time together, behaved with such desperate intensity and single-minded focus. The dog began digging frantically at the earth, his claws scraping against the dry soil with desperate intensity that sent dirt flying in. All directions like brown snow, each scratch revealing more of the ground's long-buried secrets, as if he were racing against time itself to uncover something that had waited far too long in darkness. When the first glimpse of faded pink fabric emerged from the disturbed earth like a ghost materializing from another world, the entire playground fell into stunned silence, so complete that even the wind seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of what horror was about to be revealed. Mrs. Carlton, approached with trembling steps and a face drained of all color, her heart hammering against her ribs as recognition dawned in her eyes with the force of a physical blow, because she knew that butterfly sticker, remembered those tiny shoes with painful clarity, and suddenly 7 years of unanswered questions came flooding back with devastating force that threatened to buckle her knees. The small pink sneaker that Officer Lewis carefully extracted from the soil with shaking hands wasn't just physical evidence of a long, cold crime. It was undeniable proof that little Aaliyah Robinson had never left the school grounds as everyone had believed, that she had been here all along, waiting patiently in the darkness for someone with the courage and determination to find her voice and bring her story back to the light. The small pink sneaker sat on a paper napkin atop the conference table in the staff lounge, like an accusation that refused to be silenced, its faded butterfly sticker catching the harsh fluorescent light in ways that seemed almost supernatural, as if the innocent decoration were trying to communicate across the vast chasm of 7 lost years. Principal Hammond's hands trembled slightly as he stared at the tiny shoe that couldn't have belonged to anyone over the age of 6, his mind racing through sleepless nights and unanswered questions that had haunted not just him, but the entire Westfield community like a persistent ghost that refused to find peace. The room felt heavy with the weight of memories suddenly dragged from their carefully buried graves, memories that the older staff members had tried desperately to forget but could never quite escape, no matter how many years passed or how many new students filled the hallways with fresh laughter and innocent chatter. The air conditioning hummed with mechanical indifference, while outside, the sound of children playing during recess created a stark contrast to the somber atmosphere that had settled over the adults like a thick fog rolling in from a distant storm. Mrs. Adler, a veteran teacher whose silver hair and gentle demeanor belied her sharp memory and decades of experience with troubled children, broke the suffocating silence with a voice that quavered like autumn leaves clinging to bare branches in a cold wind. "You don't think this belongs to her, do you?" she whispered, though everyone in the room already knew the answer, with a bone-deep certainty that chilled them more than any winter morning ever could. The younger teachers looked confused and slightly frightened, their faces reflecting the innocence of those who had arrived at Westfield Elementary after the tragedy, their knowledge of the school's darkest chapter limited to whispered rumors and carefully omitted details from staff orientation meetings. But the veterans exchanged glances heavy with shared knowledge of a nightmare they had hoped never to revisit, their eyes communicating volumes about sleepless nights spent, wondering what they could have done differently and whether they bore any responsibility for the horror that had unfolded under their watch. "No one's used that backfield in years," Ms. Adler continued, her voice growing stronger as the memories flooded back with crystal clarity, each detail as sharp and painful as broken glass. Not since she, but the words died in her throat, as if speaking them aloud might somehow make the horror more real than it already was, might give voice to fears that had been carefully locked away in the deepest corners of their hearts. The truth hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire, acrid and inescapable, filling their lungs with the bitter taste of failure and regret, because most of the veteran staff remembered Aaliyah Robinson, even if they had never spoken her name aloud, in 7 long years of careful silence. She had been such a quiet child, with purple-rimmed glasses that were always slightly crooked on her small nose, a girl who preferred drawing intricate pictures in the dirt, with broken sticks, to joining the boisterous games of tag and kickball that consumed her more outgoing classmates during the precious freedom of recess time. Her mother had dropped her off every morning with a kiss on her forehead and a gentle reminder to be good and listen to her teachers, never imagining in her worst nightmares that one seemingly ordinary Tuesday would be the last time she would see her daughter's shy smile or hear her whispered, "I love you too, Mummy." drifting through the rolled-down car window like a prayer that would go unanswered for eternity. Outside the school building, Officer Lewis stood rigid beside the cordoned-off area where yellow police tape fluttered in the afternoon breeze like warning flags marking the boundary between the known and the unknowable, while Noro remained stationed near the dig site with an intensity that spoke of secrets still buried beneath their feet. The German shepherd's behavior had shifted from frantic digging to something far more unsettling, a watchful stillness that suggested his work was far from finished, his intelligent eyes scanning the ground as if reading an invisible map written in scents that told stories of unspeakable tragedy. Detective Marin arrived on scene within the hour, his weathered face grim as he surveyed the area where forensic technicians were already beginning their methodical excavation of what had become an active crime scene after 7 years of cold case frustration. The veteran investigator had worked hundreds of cases during his 20-year career, but something about the way Noro sat motionless beside the disturbed earth sent an uncomfortable chill down his spine, as if the dog possessed knowledge that human investigators had somehow missed despite their best efforts and most advanced technology. As the afternoon sun cast longer shadows across the playground, the forensic team's careful brushing and sifting began to reveal additional evidence that had been waiting in the darkness for someone with the courage to look deeper than surface appearances. Fragments of pink fabric emerged from the soil like pieces of a tragic puzzle, followed by the glint of tarnished metal that caught the light and made Detective Marin's breath catch in his throat when he realized what they had discovered. The heart-shaped locket was bent and corroded from years underground, but the engraving was still clearly visible, despite the ravages of time and weather, reading, "To Aliyah with love, Mom," in delicate script that spoke of a mother's endless devotion and a daughter's trust that had been so cruelly betrayed. The small piece of jewelry represented more than just evidence. It was a tangible connection to a little girl whose voice had been silenced too soon, whose story had been buried along with her tiny body in this forgotten corner of what should have been the safest place in her young world. As Detective Marin held the locket in his gloved hands, he felt the weight of 7 years of failure pressing down on his shoulders like a physical burden. The knowledge that somehow, despite extensive searches and countless interviews, they had missed the most important clue of all because it had been hidden right under their noses in plain sight. The investigation that had once seemed hopeless suddenly blazed back to life with renewed urgency, because now they had proof that Aliyah Robinson had never left the school grounds, that someone with access to this forgotten corner had committed an unthinkable crime and then continued living among them for years, walking the same streets and breathing the same air, while a mother's heart broke a little more each day with unanswered questions and fading hope. The forensic team worked with painstaking precision as the sun began to set, their powerful lights creating stark shadows that danced across the crime scene like ghosts seeking justice, while Noro maintained his vigilant watch, as if guarding the sacred ground where innocence had been buried. But truth was finally beginning to emerge from its long hibernation in the darkness. As darkness descended over Westfield Elementary, like a heavy curtain closing on a tragic performance, Detective Marin found himself hunched over dusty case files in his cramped office, the yellowed pages spread across his desk like fragments of a shattered mirror reflecting 7 years of investigative frustration and missed opportunities that now seemed glaringly obvious in hindsight. The harsh fluorescent lighting cast deep shadows across his weathered face as he reread every witness statement, every interview transcript, and every forensic report with fresh eyes that saw patterns previously hidden in the bureaucratic maze of official documentation. The photograph of Aliyah Robinson smiled up at him from the top of her file, her bright eyes and missing front tooth, capturing a moment of childhood innocence that made his chest tighten with a familiar mixture of rage and determination that had driven him through 2 decades of hunting society's predators. Her hair had been styled in two puffy braids, secured with pink elastic bands that matched the butterfly sticker on the shoe Noro had unearthed, and Detective Marin found himself wondering what thoughts had been running through her 6-year-old mind during those final moments when fear replaced the simple joy of recess playtime. The case notes painted a picture of thorough but ultimately fruitless investigation, with search teams combing a 5-mile radius around the school while helicopters circled overhead, and hundreds of volunteers distributed flyers bearing Aaliyah's face to every business, home, and community center within driving distance of Westfield. But one detail in the maintenance records caught his attention like a red flag waving in a gentle breeze, a notation that Harold Dunley, the assistant janitor, had submitted his retirement paperwork just 11 days after Aaliyah's disappearance, citing personal stress and an inability to handle the emotional weight of working at a school where such tragedy had occurred. The timing seemed suspicious enough to warrant another look, especially when cross-referenced with staff interviews that described Dunley as increasingly agitated and withdrawn in the weeks following the incident, often found crying in the boiler room and muttering about voices and noises that no one else could hear. Meanwhile, back at the school, Officer Lewis walked the perimeter with Noro under the stark illumination of security lights that created an almost supernatural atmosphere around the crime scene, their footsteps echoing across the empty playground where children's laughter had been replaced by the whispered conversations of forensic technicians working through the night. The German shepherd's behavior remained unnaturally focused, his powerful nose leading him along what appeared to be a specific path from the dig site toward the teacher parking lot, as if following an invisible trail that only he could detect through senses honed by millions of years of evolutionary perfection. Each time Noro paused and sat in his alert position, Officer Lewis marked the spot with fluorescent spray paint, creating a constellation of evidence markers that began to form a disturbing pattern, suggesting that whoever had buried Aaliyah had made multiple trips between the shed and the parking area, possibly over several nights when the school was empty and vulnerable to those who knew its rhythms and security weaknesses intimately. The breakthrough came at dawn when Detective Marin's relentless digging through personnel records revealed a disturbing pattern that had somehow escaped notice during the original investigation 7 years earlier. Buried in a stack of invoices and work orders, he discovered documentation for temporary IT services provided by a company called Wisp Tech, a name that triggered immediate suspicion due to its ephemeral nature and lack of substantial business history. The invoice was signed by someone identified only as Aaron P., with no last name provided, just a scribbled initial that looked more like an afterthought than an official signature on legal documentation. What made this discovery even more unsettling was the timing of the services, which had been performed during the exact week when Aaliyah Robinson vanished from the school grounds, supposedly to upgrade security camera systems and maintain computer networks throughout the building. Detective Marin's hands trembled slightly as he cross-referenced this information with witness statements from other schools in the region, uncovering a chilling pattern that suggested Aaron P. had been operating under multiple aliases across several school districts, always appearing as a helpful IT consultant who volunteered to work with children and always disappearing before anyone could verify his credentials or background. The more Marin dug into WispTech's history, the more questions arose about its legitimacy, with records showing a virtual mailbox in Nevada, disconnected phone numbers, and a business license that had been issued using falsified information that created a perfect cover for someone who needed to move through school systems without leaving traditional paper trails. Meanwhile, back at Westfield Elementary, Officer Lewis and Noro were conducting another systematic search of the school grounds when the German shepherd suddenly became agitated near a storm drain that connected to the maintenance area behind the old shed. Noro's powerful nose detected scents that led him to paw frantically at a pile of debris that had accumulated over years of neglect, and when Lewis cleared away the leaves and trash, they discovered a rusted lunchbox that had been deliberately concealed beneath the storm grate. Inside the corroded container, wrapped in deteriorating plastic, were items that made Lewis's blood run cold. A collection of children's personal belongings, including hair ribbons, small toys, and most disturbing of all, a laminated visitor badge that identified the bearer as Aaron Pierce, IT Maintenance, with a photo that showed a man with an unsettlingly ordinary appearance, the kind of face that would blend into any crowd and be forgotten within minutes of a casual encounter. The discovery of Aaron Pierce's true identity sent shockwaves through the investigation team because facial recognition software immediately linked his photograph to missing children cases in 4 different states, each involving elementary schools where he had provided temporary technical services before vanishing like smoke when suspicions began to arise. Detective Marin realized they weren't just dealing with Aaliyah's murder, but potentially with a serial predator who had been using school systems as hunting grounds for years, moving from district to district with carefully crafted false identities that allowed him to gain trust and access to vulnerable children who saw him as just another helpful adult in their educational environment. Harper's small fingers gripped her crayon with the determination of someone much older than her 7 years, her concentration absolute as she worked on another drawing that would make the adults around her exchange worried glances and whispered conversations they thought she couldn't hear. The little girl had been creating these disturbing sketches for days now, each one more detailed and unsettling than the last, depicting scenes that no child should be able to imagine, much less render with such haunting accuracy on construction paper with broken crayons from the classroom art supplies. Mrs. Carlton, the school counselor, knelt beside Harper's desk with the practiced patience of someone who had spent decades helping children process trauma and fear, though nothing in her extensive training had prepared her for the eerie precision of these drawings that seemed to capture moments from a nightmare that had occurred years before Harper was even born. The latest sketch showed a tall figure in what appeared to be a janitor's uniform, standing beside a small girl with pigtails. But the most chilling detail was the set of keys dangling from the man's hand like instruments of imprisonment, and beneath the drawing, Harper had written in shaky letters that made every adult's blood run cold. He locked her in and threw away the key. When Mrs. Carlton gently asked Harper where these images came from, the child's response was delivered with the matter-of-fact tone that only children can manage when discussing the impossible. She visits me in my dreams and tells me what happened because she doesn't want other kids to disappear like she did. The counselor's professional composure nearly cracked when Harper added that Aaliyah had specifically mentioned a man who smelled like old peppermint gum and wore sneakers with blue lightning bolts, details that hadn't been released to the public and certainly weren't known to a 7-year-old child who attended a different elementary school across town. Detective Marin was immediately summoned to interview Harper, and he found himself face to face with a little girl whose innocent appearance belied the disturbing knowledge she somehow possessed about a crime that had occurred when she was barely learning to walk. Harper's mother sat protectively beside her daughter, torn between wanting to shield her child from this darkness and recognizing that Harper might hold the key to finally bringing Aaliyah's killer to justice after 7 years of cold leads and dead ends. During the careful interview, Harper revealed that the man in her dreams always carried a clipboard and had a visitor badge with no name on it, just the word maintenance, printed in letters that looked like they had been made on a home computer rather than through official channels. She described how he would approach children during recess or lunch, always alone, always with that practiced smile that adults found reassuring, but that made something deep in Harper's subconscious recoil with instinctive fear. The most disturbing revelation came when Harper mentioned that Aaliyah had told her about a room underneath the school where the man had taken her, a place that smelled like cleaning supplies and old paper, where she had tried to scream. But no one could hear her voice above the noise of machinery that ran constantly throughout the building. Detective Marin's heart raced as he realized that Harper's description matched the maintenance tunnels that ran beneath Westfield Elementary, spaces that would have been accessible to someone with the right keys and knowledge of the building's infrastructure, someone like a temporary IT consultant who would have been given access to service areas that most staff members never even knew existed. Detective Marin's patrol car crunched across the gravel driveway of a weathered house that sat like a forgotten memory on the outskirts of Westfield, its peeling paint and overgrown yard telling the story of a man who had retreated from the world 7 years ago and never quite found his way back to normal life. Harold Dunley's home reflected the weight of secrets carried too long, with sagging gutters and broken fence posts that spoke of maintenance deferred and hope abandoned, while newspapers yellowed on the front porch like accusations that had never been properly addressed or resolved. When the former janitor opened his door, Marin was struck by how much the man had aged in the years since leaving Westfield Elementary. His once sturdy frame now stooped with the burden of guilt, and his eyes carrying the haunted look of someone who had witnessed something terrible and never found the courage to speak the truth. Dunley's hands trembled as he invited the detective into a living room that felt more like a mausoleum than a home, with drawn curtains blocking out the afternoon sunlight and dust particles dancing in the few rays that managed to penetrate the gloom that had settled over his existence like a physical presence. "I've been expecting you," Dunley said, in a voice that sounded like gravel scraping against concrete, his admission hanging in the stale air between them like a confession that had been rehearsed for years but never spoken aloud until this moment of reckoning finally arrived. Detective Marin studied the old man's face as he recounted the events of that terrible Tuesday 7 years ago, when he had heard what he thought might have been a scream coming from the area behind the maintenance shed, but had been too frightened to investigate thoroughly or report what he had witnessed to the proper authorities. Dunley's story unfolded like pages from a nightmare, describing how a man claiming to be from the district office had approached him after Aaliyah's disappearance, warning him to forget what he might have heard and to avoid causing unnecessary trouble for the school administration during such a difficult time for the community. The mysterious visitor had been persuasive and authoritative, carrying himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question, and Dunley, already shaken by the tragedy and fearful of being blamed for something he didn't understand, had chosen silence over truth in a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his days. He told me that little girls sometimes run away from home and that it was better to let the professionals handle the situation without interference from well-meaning but untrained school employees, Dunley whispered, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks as he finally unburdened himself of the secret that had been eating away at his soul like acid for 7 long years. Detective Marin felt his pulse quicken as he realized that the man who had silenced Harold Dunley was almost certainly Aaron Pierce, the predator who had been operating within the school system while simultaneously covering his tracks by intimidating potential witnesses into compliance through manipulation and false authority. The pattern was becoming clearer with each revelation, painting a picture of a calculated predator who understood how institutional hierarchies worked and knew exactly how to exploit the natural deference that employees showed to anyone, claiming to represent higher authority, especially during times of crisis when clear thinking became clouded by fear and confusion about proper procedures. The FBI's arrival at Westfield Elementary transformed the quiet school into the epicenter of a multi-state manhunt that would challenge everything law enforcement thought they knew about tracking predators who operated in the shadows of institutional trust and bureaucratic confusion. Special Agent Grace Mallory stepped out of her unmarked SUV with the confident stride of someone who had spent years hunting society's most dangerous criminals, her laptop already loaded with evidence that connected Aaron Pierce to a network of missing children cases that stretched across state lines like a spiderweb of unimaginable horror. The breakthrough had come through digital forensics that traced Pierce's online activities to encrypted message boards where predators shared techniques for gaining access to schools and maintaining cover. Identities that could withstand casual scrutiny from overworked administrators who rarely had time to verify credentials thoroughly. Agent Mallory's investigation revealed that Pierce had been operating under multiple aliases for over a decade, always targeting elementary schools in suburban communities where parents felt safe and security measures were often more focused on keeping children in rather than keeping predators out of the educational environment. The sophistication of his operation was staggering, with fake business licenses, forged references, and carefully crafted social media profiles that created the illusion of a legitimate IT consultant who specialized in helping small school districts upgrade their technology infrastructure on limited budgets. What made Pierce particularly dangerous was his understanding of how school systems functioned, allowing him to identify vulnerable points in security protocols and exploit the natural trust that educators placed in anyone who claimed to be there to help children learn and grow in a safe environment. Detective Marin found himself working around the clock as the investigation expanded beyond Westfield's borders, coordinating with law enforcement agencies in 4 different states, where Pierce had left his mark on communities that were still struggling to understand how their children had vanished from supposedly secure school grounds without leaving any trace of their fate. The pattern was always the same. Pierce would appear as a helpful volunteer or temporary contractor, spend several weeks gaining the trust of staff and students, and then disappear just before anyone noticed that a child was missing from their classroom or playground, leaving behind only confusion and grief in communities that had believed their children were protected by the very institutions that had unknowingly provided access to their predator. The manhunt intensified when security footage from a public library 2 towns over captured images of a man matching Pierce's description using a computer terminal to access the same encrypted networks that had been under FBI surveillance for months, suggesting that he was still operating in the area and possibly planning his next move against another unsuspecting school district. Agent Mallory coordinated with local police departments to establish surveillance at every elementary school within a 50-mile radius of Westfield, knowing that Pierce's psychological profile suggested he was drawn back to the scenes of his crimes by a compulsion that often led serial predators to make the mistakes that finally brought them to justice. The net was closing around Aaron Pierce, but everyone involved in the investigation understood that until he was physically in custody, children throughout the region remained at risk from a predator whose ability to blend into institutional environments had allowed him to operate undetected for far too long, leaving a trail of shattered families and unanswered questions that stretched back more than a decade of carefully planned and executed crimes. The morning mist clung to Westfield Elementary's playground like a shroud when Officer Lewis noticed Noro's behavior shift into a state of hypervigilance that immediately set every nerve in the handler's body on high alert, the German shepherd's ears swiveling like radar dishes scanning for threats that human senses couldn't detect but canine instincts recognized with crystal clarity. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong, and Noro's rigid posture communicated danger with the urgency of a fire alarm, screaming through the early morning silence that had settled over the school grounds like a deceptive blanket of peace. The K9's powerful nose worked frantically as he processed scent molecules that told a story of recent intrusion, his training screaming that someone had been prowling around the school during the night hours when darkness provided cover for activities that couldn't withstand the scrutiny of daylight observation. Officer Lewis followed his partner's lead toward the perimeter fence where delivery trucks usually made their scheduled stops. But today the area felt different, charged with an electricity that made the hair on his arms stand up as if lightning were about to strike the innocent-looking patch of asphalt and chain-link fencing. That's when they saw him, a figure in a grey hoodie standing just beyond the school property line with the calculated casualness of someone who wanted to appear invisible while actually conducting careful surveillance of potential targets within the educational facility. The man's posture was too studied, too deliberate for someone simply waiting for a bus or taking a casual morning walk. And when Officer Lewis shouted a challenge across the distance that separated them, the stranger's reaction confirmed every suspicion that had been building in the experienced officer's mind since Noro first detected the threat. Aaron Pierce turned slowly, his face partially obscured by the hood, but his body language radiating the cold confidence of a predator who had been playing this deadly game for years, without facing serious consequences for his actions against innocent children and their families. For a brief moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Pierce made direct eye contact with Officer Lewis. And in that exchange of glances, both men understood that the careful cat-and-mouse game that had been playing out for weeks was about to escalate into something far more dangerous and immediate. Then Pierce melted away into the urban landscape like smoke dissipating in morning wind, vanishing down an alley with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of appearing and disappearing at will, always staying one step ahead of law enforcement while leaving behind only questions and evidence that seemed to evaporate under official scrutiny. The massive search that followed involved 6 police units, a helicopter with thermal imaging equipment, and K9 teams from 3 different departments. But Pierce had once again demonstrated his supernatural ability to vanish, without leaving any trace of his passage through the suburban streets and commercial areas that surrounded Westfield Elementary, like a maze designed to frustrate pursuers. When the search teams finally discovered the drainage culvert, where Pierce had apparently hidden during the initial sweep, they found evidence that chilled them to the bone. A sealed envelope containing a handwritten note that read, "Tell the dog to stay out of my business," in block letters that suggested Pierce was not only aware of Noro's role in exposing his crimes, but was now directly threatening the K9 officer who had shattered 7 years of carefully maintained silence about Aaliyah Robinson's fate, and opened the door to an investigation that threatened to unravel Pierce's entire network of predatory activities across multiple states. The most unsettling aspect of the Aaliyah Robinson case wasn't the forensic evidence or the manhunt for Aaron Pierce, but rather the inexplicable connection between Harper and the murdered child that defied every rational explanation investigators could construct, leaving even seasoned law enforcement professionals questioning the boundaries between the possible and the supernatural. Harper's drawings continued to provide details that no living person should have known, sketches that depicted not only Aaron Pierce's appearance with startling accuracy, but also specific locations within Westfield Elementary's underground maintenance tunnels that weren't shown on any architectural plans available to the public or even most school staff members. Child psychologists brought in to evaluate Harper's mental state were baffled by her calm demeanor when discussing these disturbing visions, noting that she displayed none of the typical signs of trauma or fabrication that usually accompanied such extraordinary claims from young witnesses. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a renowned expert in childhood psychology, spent hours interviewing Harper and concluded that the little girl genuinely believed she was communicating with Aaliyah's spirit, describing conversations that occurred in dreams so vivid that Harper could recall specific details about the underground room where Aaliyah had been held captive before her murder. The psychologist's report noted that Harper's knowledge extended beyond visual details to include sounds, smells, and even emotional states that she claimed Aaliyah had shared during their nocturnal meetings, information that proved remarkably consistent with the physical evidence being uncovered by forensic teams working in the school's basement areas. Perhaps most disturbing was Harper's insistence that Aaliyah wasn't the only child trying to communicate through her dreams, mentioning other young voices that whispered about different schools and different hiding places where Aaron Pierce had left his mark on families across multiple states and countless communities. Detective Marin found himself caught between his rational training and the undeniable fact that Harper's supernatural insights had provided more useful leads than years of conventional investigative work, forcing him to consider possibilities that challenged everything he thought he knew about how justice operates in a world governed by scientific evidence and logical deduction. The case files began to include references to Harper's dreams alongside forensic reports and witness statements, creating an unprecedented blend of traditional police work and paranormal investigation that would have been dismissed as fantasy under normal circumstances but couldn't be ignored when it consistently produced actionable intelligence about Pierce's methods and movements. Other children in the community began reporting similar dreams after Harper's story became known among local families, with several young students claiming that they too had been visited by spirits of missing children who wanted their stories told and their killers brought to justice before more innocent lives were lost to predators who operated in the shadows of institutional trust. The phenomenon spread beyond Westfield as news of the case reached other communities where children had vanished under similar circumstances, with parents reporting that their surviving children were suddenly having nightmares about underground rooms and men with visitor badges who promised help but delivered only terror and death to families that would never recover from their losses. 6 months after Noro's fateful discovery beneath the Westfield Elementary playground, the bronze statue of a German shepherd sits vigilant in the memorial garden where children now play under the watchful eyes of parents who understand that evil can wear familiar faces and speak with trusted voices, while somewhere in the shadows, Aaron Pierce remains a phantom who has once again vanished into the network of false identities and institutional vulnerabilities that have protected him for over a decade of predatory hunting. The FBI's manhunt continues across state lines with renewed intensity, armed with evidence that Noro's determination helped uncover, but Pierce's ability to disappear and reinvent himself has proven more sophisticated than anyone initially realized, suggesting a level of planning and preparation that speaks to crimes dating back far longer than investigators originally suspected. Detective Marin still works the case every day, surrounded by photographs of missing children whose faces haunt his dreams and whose voices seem to whisper through the evidence files that continue growing as more communities realize they too may have encountered the man who moves through school systems like a virus, infecting trust and leaving devastation in his wake. Harper's drawings have stopped, the little girl claiming that Aaliyah's spirit has found peace now that her story has been told and her killer's face has been revealed to the world. But sometimes she mentions other children who visit her dreams with stories about different schools and different hiding places where secrets still wait to be discovered by someone brave enough to listen to voices that speak from beyond the grave. The Memorial Garden at Westfield Elementary has become a pilgrimage site for families whose children have vanished without explanation. Parents who come seeking answers that may never arrive, but finding comfort in the bronze dog, whose unwavering loyalty proved that some bonds transcend death itself and that justice, though delayed, can still find its voice through the most unexpected messengers. Noro continues his work as a canine officer, but teachers and students notice that he sometimes pauses near the memorial statue, as if listening to sounds that only he can hear, his ears perked forward and his intelligent eyes, scanning spaces that appear empty to human observers, but may contain presences that exist beyond the boundaries of normal perception. The case has changed how school districts across the country verify the credentials of temporary workers and volunteers, but experts warn that predators like Aaron Pierce evolve their methods as quickly as security measures improve, always staying one step ahead of systems designed to protect the innocent while exploiting the very trust that makes educational communities function. As night falls over Westfield and children sleep safely in their beds, parents and teachers wonder if Aaron Pierce is out there somewhere, watching and waiting for his next opportunity to strike at the heart of another community's faith in the institutions meant to nurture and protect their most precious treasures. The truth remains elusive, dancing just beyond reach like shadows that shift when observed too closely. But one certainty echoes through the darkness. Sometimes justice barks, and when it does, the wise listen carefully to what it has to say about secrets buried too deep and too long in places where innocence goes to die. And you, what did you think about this story? Tell us in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next videos.